In this video, we are going to continue our discussion of peers, peer relations, talking about the importance of peers. In the previous video, we had talked about the function that peers serve. We had talked about the development of friendships, the interactions, the groups that we hang around with, and how they impact how we see ourselves, how they add to a sense of identity. We talked about cliques and crowds, and how over years, how that will change. Not kids when they're really young, not that cliquish, but as they get into junior high, it becomes in full swing, but slowly kind of fades away as they get into later adolescence, because they start to realize that they're more than just one thing. They don't necessarily allow the group to define them. Not everybody. Some people will still do that, but a lot of later adolescents will start to explore into multiple groups, and the crowds get to be a little bit more diverse. Well, in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about peer pressure and how peer pressure impacts adolescence. We'll talk about some of the common behaviors that teachers have to deal with in the classroom, hopefully on a limited basis, but maybe bullying behavior and what we can do, and some of the reasons as to why people might choose to bully, the impact of fitting in. We'll also talk about some of the characteristics of early and late maturation in adolescence, and how that can affect how the student sees themselves. So the first thing that I want to begin or start to discuss is peer pressure. And you have the PowerPoint, so you can go along with this. But when you think about peer pressure, what is your natural inclination to think about? Most of the time we think about peer pressure, it's related to negative things. We think of peer pressure to cheat, or peer pressure to go out late, or peer pressure to drive fast, or who knows what. There's any number of behaviors. But peer pressure is not defined by something that is necessarily negative. When we're talking about peer pressure, we're really talking about a person's influence to do things that they otherwise wouldn't choose to do. So that means, by definition, that peer pressure can sway both positive and negative. Now, we most often think of the negative aspects, but a lot of times parents and some teachers and some other adult authorities might have tried to use some positive peer pressure, perhaps by doing things like getting students to get work done in a timely fashion. And if you do, you can all go outside, you can all have a party or whatever else. Say you want to get homework, study for a test, everybody get a certain grade. Parents do the same thing. They want you to hang around certain students, certain friends. It's like, well, I really like Jimmy, or I like Mary. They like those students because they study, they're from, they don't get in trouble, they have a job, or maybe they just like to play around the house, so they don't want to get into things. And anyway, a lot of times you'll find parents kind of like, oh, why don't you hang around with them? I really like them. They're hoping that by hanging around the right people, that you'll choose the right activities, or you'll choose the right behaviors, or you'll engage in the appropriate behaviors. Okay, so as parents, we understand that all too well. So the idea is peer pressure can go either positive or negative. Now, why are our students impacted? Because it typically stems from a desire to fit in, to be part of the in crowd. That's where all the influence or the pressure comes from, is that desire to fit in. Now, when you think about who's most vulnerable to peer pressure, it is the adolescents. Now, think about it. Why are the adolescents so vulnerable to peer pressure? Well, what you'll find is that time of adolescence is a time where kids begin asking, who am I? What am I good at? What do I like to do? Right? Do I fit in? Do people like me? Can I do this? They have all these questions about who they are, where they're going, what they're doing, all of that stuff, which makes them very vulnerable to others to fit in. And so when you think about it, a lot of times young adolescents, as their changing bodies are changing, going through different things, acne or weight gain or body changes, some preferred, some not preferred, late maturation, early maturation, all of this stuff that's going on, man, it plays havoc with a student's esteem and sometimes their confidence. Well, when you lack confidence, what's the best way to gain confidence? It's to be successful. Where is success measured in schools and classrooms? Well, it could be academics, it could be athletics, it can also be being part of a group. That's where that desire to fit in really comes into play. And when you're part of a group, you feel better about yourself, and then suddenly your esteem starts to pick up. People with poor family relations, poor connections with parents or guardians or extended family, or maybe they don't do much with the family's not that interested in what they do, and as a result of that, you're just looking for someone to fill that void, susceptible to peer pressure. And of course, those who are socially rejected or isolated, they're looking for someone. They're looking for that attention. They're looking for to be recognized. Think back about when we talked about status and peer status. We talk about the popular kids. We talk about those that are rejected. Why are they rejected? Okay? And what you find is that those people are being rejected because maybe they're socially awkward, maybe they're overly aggressive. But either way, when you're by yourself for a while, that desire to be a part of something, to fit in, gets really great, and suddenly the students, give in to peer pressure. Could be positive, could be negative, all right? And when you add the pressure from friends or cliques, then it even tends to have a greater impact. So when we start thinking about things that are going to happen or things that commonly occur in classrooms at all ages, from elementary, middle school, junior high, high school, one of the things that's has to deal with peer interactions, peer relations, peer pressure, overall adolescent development is bullying. Okay, when you think about bullying, we're talking about any sort of intentional causing of harm, physical, psychological, to another person. Okay, it's the intentional act of hurting somebody, either psychologically or physically. Okay, so when you think about that, it doesn't look the same even 15, 20 years ago. It's changed. Okay, right now when you think about bullying, what comes to mind? What behaviors come to mind? You still may find that a lot of us think about like somebody getting into a fight, somebody pushing somebody, somebody hitting somebody. But we also find that there's a lot of online social media bullying that's going on too, cyberbullying that you see, quite prevalent in today's adolescents. And a lot of times it's just even over the phone. People on Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook or any sort of social media platform where students interact with one another, post things. It's a great way sometimes to be anonymous, and that helps. That anonymity gives you courage, right? You can say nasty things, you can be mean to somebody if they don't really know who you are. Well, wow, now there's no repercussions for your actions or your behavior. So suddenly, cyberbullying takes on a whole different form. It gives you a lot more power than what you ever had before. All right. So as teachers, we think about this. It's like, okay, what are the effects? What do I do? What do I see in my classroom? Well, you'll still find that a lot of times the behaviors across gender lines may differ a little bit. Generally, males are a bit more physically aggressive. They're certainly verbally aggressive, but physically aggressive. Females tend to be verbally aggressive as well, but they tend to be more relational or exclusionary in their bullying behavior. They talk about in the book. They talk about overt versus relational aggression, and how the boys are much more likely to engage in overt behaviors. Now, I have a stat in in the PowerPoint that talks about some bullying statistics. I'm not that interested in all the statistics, but what you'll notice in some of them is that roughly 6 out of 10 kids have reported that something mean has been said to them, said or to them online. So a lot of kids are getting bullied online. Roughly 8 out of 10 kids have been the victim of one type of bullying another. 8 out of 10. That means that basically most all of our students are not going to go unscathed. You're going to encounter acts of aggression, verbally, physical, something like that, or exclusionary tactics, keeping people out of stuff, cyberbullying, whatever else. It's likely to happen to a majority of our kids. And they talk about how 46%, or roughly 1 out of every 2 males will have gotten into some sort of physical confrontation. 1 out of every 4 girls will have gotten into some sort of physical confrontation. So again, bullying is going to extend way beyond the classroom, and then sometimes it's going to have a physical confrontation. Now, there's a couple of facts that I think are really important for us to kind of think about when we look at our students in the classroom and those behaviors. One of them is that only 25% of students report that their teachers intervene in bullying situations. Think about that for 1 second. 1 out of 4 teachers report bullying behavior when they've seen it. They don't intervene. Why might teachers not intervene? Now, I know everybody likes to think, oh, this is something that's typical of junior high and high school kids, and we don't see this. We see this at a lot younger ages than you think. You can see this bullying behavior start as early as 1st grade, 2nd grade. Okay, you can see some bad behaviors that we don't want to necessarily infer bullying behavior, because bullying is an intentional act. But still, you start to see that, because when the kids start to see differences, we talked about in the previous video, about 7, 8 years old, kids start to identify differences. Sometimes those differences put certain elementary students at odds with one another, and then with those feelings, sometimes they don't know how to respond or how to deal with those feelings, and bullying behaviors can start to be generated. So this is not a topic just for junior high and high school students. But the point is that teachers can see this, and 3 out of 4 of them don't do anything about it. Why is that? Well, if you think about it, there's a number of possible explanations. One of them is they really just don't know what to do. Okay, we all like to think we know what to do, but until it happens, do we really know what to do? Sometimes people think, well, that's just part of behavior. Young kids, junior high, they just kind of go through these things. They got to learn how to deal with it. We can't be there all the time for them, so we can't necessarily hold their hand all the time. Well, what else? Sometimes they think the kids are just monkeying around, goofing around, and as a result, they're just playing around. Just let them keep playing. Sometimes you see with older kids, you might be fearful. I don't want to step into that. If I step into that, I could likely get hurt. There's any number of reasons as to why teachers might not engage or intervene when they see something going on. But the truth is that as a teacher, it is our responsibility to provide a safe environment for kids to learn. Not just learn academic stuff, but also to socialize, to be motivated to learn, to be motivated to play, to be motivated to find out who we are from an identity standpoint. And so the idea is that the safe environment isn't strictly just for physical safety, it's also emotional safety. If you're being picked on by someone, you could easily withdraw from the classroom. Just sit towards the back, don't open up, don't share stuff, don't ask questions. And as a result of that, suddenly you're falling further behind. Or you don't want to come to the classroom at all because you're afraid of people. And as a result of that, then you're falling further behind. Socially, cognitively, motivationally. And the effects of bullying is not just for the bullied, but also for the bullies themselves. People that are bullied, we find oftentimes will develop lower self-esteem. Certainly emotional distress. That emotional distress can lead to states of depression or bouts of depression. But the bullies themselves, they don't necessarily go unscathed. A lot of times they can start to engage in a sense of exaggerated sense of self-esteem. I'm better, I'm bigger, I'm whatever. And as a result, suddenly you're engaging in behaviors that you shouldn't because you think you're better, you're stronger, you're whatever. What happens is eventually those bad behaviors can lead to further delinquent behaviors and other bad behaviors, and eventually school is not the place for you, or you have problems with the law, any number of things. And so when we think about bullying behavior, we realize and I oftentimes I like to ask students to think about if you are in a situation in your classroom, why do some kids bully? We don't just teach stuff. We also have to understand our students. And when we develop an understanding of why our students behave the way we do, remember, think about theories, and we start to understand some of this stuff. When we understand why they behave the way we do, that's when we come up with possible solutions. No guaranteed success, just possible solutions, right? So, having said that, we have to ask ourselves, so why do kids bully? What's going on? Why are they engaging in these behaviors? Think about that for a second. Why would someone choose to bully another student? Second grader, fourth grader, sixth grader, eighth grader, 10th grader. Why? Any number of reasons. That's how they behave at home. Parents, older siblings, that's how they treat one another. They treat each other bad, treat each other poorly. They result of physical confrontation when things get difficult. Don't talk it through, just punch it through. Maybe they're looking for attention. They don't get any attention at home, so they decide that's what I'm going to do, what I'm going to do. Maybe they don't feel good about themselves. Think about this for a second. If you had a choice, and I'm going to ask you a question. I ask this of all my students. If you had a choice to be thought of by your classmates, by your peers, as stupid or as a bully, which would you choose? Now, you might not like either one of those answers, but you have to choose one. Would you choose to be thought of as stupid or as a bully? Ask yourself which one, and then tell me why. Why that one? Some common responses you might hear are, I don't want people to think of me as mean. I might not be the smartest, but at least I'm a good person, and that way I can develop friendships that way. Sometimes their moral compass tells them, don't behave like that because that's just wrong. Sometimes people choose to be thought of as a bully. Ask them why. And it's partly because they just don't like the way that people think about them or look at them. You ask a little bit further, well, what do you mean by that? And what you find is, by being a bully, you control the situation. And that's the key. Control. Why do students bully? A lot of times it has to do with wanting to control a situation, because maybe a lot of their life is not in control. If you feel like you're stupid, people look at you as you're stupid, and you want to change the narrative, how do you do that? Well, one way to do that is become a bully. Okay? So stop looking at, having this monolithic group or monolithic view of what bully behavior is. I don't condone anything. I need you to understand it. When you understand why students behave the way they do, then you can come up with a solution, and you can develop a rapport with that student where you possibly can then change or alter their behavior. And so bullying behavior, comes across for a number of reasons. Never condone it, but we have to understand it a little bit if we want to perhaps make a difference or impact change. So I have a PowerPoint, or not PowerPoint. I have a slide that says best practices in prevention and intervention, and there's a lot of good ideas in that on that slide. But what I really want you to pay attention to is the three of them. First one is assess bullying at the school. Where does bullying take place? Ask yourself right now, where does bullying behavior typically take place at school? I bet you can list it pretty quickly. Let's see. We have bathrooms or locker rooms, cafeteria, hallways, outside or playground or something like that, on the bus. Now, are there other places? Sure, but not. Those are typically the 5 places. We know where it takes place. You know where a lot of bullying takes place. So if you know that, then the question becomes, what do we do about it? So the second point that I always like to make is train the staff in bully prevention. What should I do if this behavior happens? What should I do? Okay? And as teachers, sometimes we have the answers, sometimes we don't. That's why we listen to people in services or workshops or groups and stuff like that talk about ways to deal with bullied behavior. And then lastly is intervene consistently and appropriately in bullying situations. Intervene consistently and appropriately. You need to set the tone for what your classroom, how it will operate. What are your expectations? Okay? So the 3 things that I always try to keep in mind is, where does it happen? What do I do? And be consistent in my intervention. Where does it happen? How do I deal with it? Deal with it consistently. Those are the 3 things that we like to think about as far as dealing with. Now, you have to ask yourself again, when we talk about training staff to deal with bullying situations, it's like, as a teacher, do I do this? Well, ideally, I'd like to do it in private. I'd like to address the behavior in private, try to take care of it. I don't want to ostracize the student. I don't want to embarrass them in front of other people, okay? I obviously have to intervene if it's something that is harming someone right there. Of course, if the students are bigger and stronger and stuff, then you have to have another protocol. But we have to have a set of ideas or strategies of how to deal with these behaviors worked out in our mind, practice them, think about them so that we can engage quickly as opposed to waiting. All right? And as a student, sometimes some of this stuff is just commonsensical. I always laugh because I'll tell my students, I have a friend of mine, his name is Matt Forbeck, and he's an author, and he writes like sci-fi books, and sometimes he does some narratives or programming for like Call of Duty or different games like that, where he'll set up the background story and all that stuff, right? I think we were freshmen or sophomores in high school, and I can remember staying outside of the gym, and he was getting a drink of water, and I said something nasty to him. I was being a jerk, and he turned around and he popped me right in the mouth. And he split my lip right there a little bit. Okay? Now, what do? Well, you already know the end of the story. We're friends, so. But what happened was, behavior right then and there, I stepped off a little bit. I think we kind of went at each other a little bit. Other friends kind of just stopped it all. Nothing really happened. And it all worked out. We were friends. We're still friends to this day. I've got triplets. He's got quadruplets. So, I mean, between the 2 of us, we're quite a pair there. But not everything resolves itself that easily. So sometimes as teachers, you got to be willing to say, okay, what do I do in this scenario? And you guys have to work those things out. Because we don't want students to be afraid of coming to school, afraid of coming to the classroom. Teachers need to have a set of expectations and behaviors. Well, what about if they're just monkeying around? I always say, I got 4 boys, but I got triple boys. And some of the things that they say to each other, they're so mean. And I think to myself, if they were in the classroom, I would hope the teacher at that point in time would step in and say, you can't say that. And they're like, well, it's just my brother. And she or he would say, yeah, but that's not appropriate behavior for this classroom or for anywhere. And if I let it go because you guys are brothers, then I'm condoning it, and I'm not condoning it. And I don't want other people to think that that's okay to do. So therefore, I just don't allow it in my classroom, period. Set the tone. Set the tone. That's where it starts, early on as a teacher. Now, when you think about those years, especially the adolescent years, the kids are very vulnerable. They're trying to figure out who they are. In the textbook, Eric Erickson, great name, right? Eric Erickson. What kind of parent does that to their child? My name is David Davidson. My name is Robin Robinson. Oh, anyway, Steven Stevenson's. Anyway, I wouldn't do that. But Eric Erickson, many people know what he talks about. He talks about emotional and personal development. He has a theory, stage theory. He talks about that from kids, from infancy to adulthood. And the idea is that he recognizes across the lifespan that people encounter a set of dilemmas or a set of crises. And when they resolve these crises successfully, that adds another dimension to their overall personality or to their own personal development. Okay, that the output or the outcome of that resolution determines future adjustments. So what does that mean? That means that if you have ever heard or take a look in the book and they talk about something like a trust versus mistrust or autonomy versus shame adult, what does that mean? That means at a very young age, in infancy, that children are developing a sense of trust. All right? If that trust is violated or that trust is lost, okay, they don't just suddenly grow up a little older and say, oh, I trust everybody. What happens is, what Erickson proposes is that until you get a successful resolution of that trust issue, you're going to go into future relationships, future friendships, future whatever, with an issue related to your trust. Trust versus mistrust. So there might be more mistrust in relations until you resolve that issue of trust. And that goes on for all of the stages. For us, we just focus on primarily the K through 12 years, right? And so when you take a look at the PowerPoint, we'll really focus on 3 stages. We'll focus on initiative versus guilt, okay, which is usually in those pre-K years and into up into first grade. And then we'll talk a little bit about the industry versus inferiority. And then we'll also talk about the identity versus identity diffusion. That's the K through 12 years, right? So when you think about initiative, initiative versus guilt starts in preschool age. Think about preschoolers going into kindergarten, maybe first grade. What would you say is the major accomplishment of that time period? What are the kids trying to show you? What are the kids trying to accomplish? You could think of a lot of things that they're doing, right? Okay, think of the things that they're doing, like tying their shoes, putting on a winter coat, using scissors, writing their name. Okay, think about those things. What are they doing? They're showing you that they can do something. There's a sense of independence, right? And when you get that sense of independence, the kids develop a real sense of initiative. However, when they don't get that sense of initiative, then comes in a sense of guilt. If anybody's had a chance to work with a young child tying their shoes, watch them as they're trying to tie their shoe. Some adults are very impatient, and their natural inclination is to say, here, let me just do it. And they just jump in there and they just start tying the shoes. And what do? What do the kids do? They are like, oh. They're like, fine. They just just do it. They're all mad because they wanted to do it. Put on their coat. Let me zip up your coat. I got it. Right? And then you start doing it and they're just like, oh, whatever, fine, right? The idea is they want to show you that they can do that. They want to show you that they're independent, that they can do things. By doing that, they develop a sense of initiative. And when you're constantly doing it for them, a sense of guilt comes in, like, I'm not good enough. I'm not as good. I always laugh because when I taught kindergarten, they called me Dr. Eric, and I would go out on the playground, and I would invariably run across some kid on the monkey bars or something like that, and they'd say, Dr. Eric, watch me. And I'd watch him or her, and they'd be going across the monkey bars, and they'd make it all the way to the other side. I'd say, oh, wow, great job, man, that was good. You must be tired. And I would be all energetic and everything else. And then what do you think would happen? What would I hear then? watch me, watch me, watch me. Oh my God! Then I got a line of 14 kids just in the lineup, and they're all going to go through it. One kid takes one goes one bar out and falls down, gets up, goes to the end of the line. Wait, watch me again, right? But that's what they're doing. They're just trying to show you that they can accomplish things, that they can do that. They have a sense of initiative, and they want to be reinforced. So think about what can you do as a teacher to help students build a sense of initiative. Well, one of those things is positive reinforcement, encouragement, telling the kids that they can do it, giving them that verbal praise. You also have to allow students to make choices. If you're always making choices for them, they don't get a sense of initiative. When I taught kindergarten, I'd have 5 stations around the room, and invariably I would have a new station every couple of weeks. Maybe I'd have the theater station. Once you have a theater station with some clothes and everything like that, 15 kids in my kindergarten class, and I would allow 3 kids to a station. I'd ask Billy where he wants to go, and he would say, it's a brand new station, theater. And I ask, I asked Lisa, and she says, theater. Then I ask Jose, and Jose says, theater. And then I ask Cameron, and Cameron says, theater. And I say, Cameron, sorry, there's already 3 people at that station. You have to pick another station. I allow them to make choices, but I recognize that they can't always get what they want for every choice. And then I say to them, well, tomorrow we'll start with you. And if you want to go to theater, you can start tomorrow. And then we just work that through, developing this, making choices. One of the things I would have in my classroom, I might have a sand table or a water table. Well, what do you think I'm going to have with a sand table? Yes, I hope you're shaking your head and you say you're going to have a bunch of sand on the floor because that's what you're going to have. That's okay. You don't think I know that when I put that station out there? Yeah, I know that's going to happen. But what am I allowing the kids to do? Learning to play with sand. Make things with sand. See when sand is wet, what the sand looks like. Okay? Talk, making different things, etc. They're going to make a mess, but then I allow them to make the choice to clean it up. Initiative stems from making choices, finishing up if there's consequences or things that are associated with that choice, then they have to clean up. Okay, another thing in kindergarten, we have an art table. We have a big bottle of glue. You've seen those tall bottles of glue, and one kid grabs a bottle of glue. We're doing an art project, and they sit there and they squeeze it all. They pour it all on there on the table. They make this big old lake of glue, Lake Winnetaga, right? They take one little star and they go boop right in the lake. Okay? And I'm like, whoa. I don't say anything. I don't get all mad because that's what kids do, right? I just say, whoa, no more glue. I'm like, everybody at the table. Let's get some Q-tips out. Let's all dip into Lake Winnetaga. Let's use Lake Winnetaga glue, and you just have fun with it. You allow them to make mistakes. You let them understand why they shouldn't do that, etc., right? Choices, reinforcement, actions, consequences, all that stuff helps build a sense of initiative. Now, as they get older, we want kids to be able to build a sense of industry, okay, versus inferiority. That typically takes place in elementary school through middle school into junior high. Well, let's think about what's going on at that time period. How is life changing for them? Well, what we see during that time period is their life is becoming much more active. Now the kids have homework. The kids have tests. The kids have friendships. The kids have chores. The kids have extracurricular activities. The kids they've got a lot of different things, right? And what we find is that during that period, those students, those children who are able to have a sense of balance with all of those activities going on in their life, they develop a real sense of industry. They develop a sense of I can do that. I can manage all this stuff. However, remember at that age, they're looking around, they're looking at their peers, they're seeing what their peers can do. Social comparisons are much the norm at this age. That's why those cliques start to form, right? Social comparisons. The kids are looking around, and they start to see that some of their friends can do certain things and have a sense of balance, and other kids can't. And if you're not one of them, you can start to feel a sense of inferiority. So we as teachers are about building kids up, building a sense of industry. So how do we do that? Well, how we do that is we help them become more organized. We perhaps give them planners. We happen to develop routines or habits, Monday, Wednesday, Friday math lessons, Tuesday, Thursday language, arts, and science. We have different things, different activities where they develop expectations, they develop habits, they develop good practices. Perhaps we have things on the wall, charts on the wall to monitor progress. We have journals or portfolios. The idea is we're trying to help the kids organize, become more manageable of their time, to be able to balance those things, to develop a sense of industry. Now, we don't want to create a sense from, as a teacher, that the classroom is overly competitive. Yeah, okay. What is competition? What happens with competition? We know one thing to be true. In competitions, there are winners and there are losers. If you're on the losing end all the time, you start to think you're a loser, which then you start to feel inferior, and then it's difficult to develop a sense of industry. We want to make our classrooms, nothing wrong with competition, it can be fun, but it can't be the dominant part of a class. We need to encourage more collaboration. I remember when I was young, I would race to get done first with a test, be the first one done, because the first one done clearly is the smartest, okay? That's not true, but I would think so, and others might think so, and I would work really hard to get done first. I wasn't the smartest, and I didn't do the best, but I was first, right? Silly things, but that's what the mind is going through. That's what we're thinking, okay? So we're trying to focus on mastery of skills. We're trying to focus on kids learning to be good, to do well on their own, as opposed to worrying about how they compare to others. That means we need to minimize comparisons and focus on more that they master a skill. You know, we want to set high expectations, but we don't want to be through comparisons to others. The last stage that we'll talk about with Erickson is it really revolves around more a sense of identity. And when we talk about identity, we're talking about that one question. What is it? Who am I, right? Who am I? What am I good at? What do I like? What can I do? Etc. Kids get into junior high and high school, and that question becomes a predominant part of their thinking, and they want to answer it. That is a stage of identity versus identity diffusion. Okay, I need to better understand who am I and what I'm good at, etc. Now think about that for a sense. As a teacher, we are working with the junior high school kids. We want to help them develop a greater sense of who they are. What kind of things do we do? Well, first things that we got to do is we got to give kids chances to try different stuff. We got to push them to get outside of their comfort zone and try things. Try out for the play. Try out for a sport. Try out for the debate team. Try out for cross country. Try out for science club. Whatever it is, we got to get them to try stuff. Because sometimes you never know what you like or what you're good at until you're pushed into a point where you have to try it. So we have to encourage that. We also have to use, again, like anything else, reinforcement, positive reinforcement, praise. Let the students know that we see them, that we like what they're doing, that we love their effort and what they're trying, and they're stepping outside of their comfort zone. We want to encourage that behavior because that's how they develop a better sense of self. Kids are going to try different clothes on, try different hairstyles, try any number of things, right? As long as it doesn't interfere with student learning or impact the classroom in any way, what do we care? It's just hair. Who cares if it's baby, robin egg blue? I don't care. Will I be startled when I first see it? Probably. Would you be startled? Yeah. Does it mean that you disapprove? No. It just says, I didn't expect that. You can even tell them, wow, you shocked me with that color. What made you decide to do that color? I like it. Do you like it? We just have a conversation. It's not a big deal. But we got to allow them to be themselves. Try on different hats, so to speak, right? Bring in people from the community to talk about what they do. If kids are trying to figure out who they are and what they're good at, well, the only reason that they find that out is through talking to people sometimes, or reading books, or watching YouTube videos. There's any number of ways, but the idea is to encourage that. Now, one person who talked about really well and gives you a good understanding of the true sense of identity. And Erickson talked about the psychosocial moratorium. But James Marshall really talks about the identity statuses that many young adolescents and early adults will go through as they're trying to achieve a sense of identity or who they are. It doesn't happen that early. It doesn't happen that often that you leave high school and you just like, I know who I am and what I'm good at, where I'm going to go, et cetera, et cetera. That's unlikely, right? So what we see is, and if you take a look at your PowerPoint, you'll notice that there's a kind of a Punnett square, a box in there. And you'll notice that when we talk about identity from Erickson's standpoint or from Marsh's standpoint, you're going to realize that there are two dimensions by which people need to go through to some extent in order to develop a real sense of identity achievement. Now, he talks about the four different identity statuses. They are identity achieved, psychosocial moratorium, a state of foreclosure, or a state of identity diffusion or confusion. Now, in the bottom right-hand corner is the sense of identity diffusion and confusion. What do we know about there? We know that within those two issues or two aspects of identity, commitment and exploration, that the kids that are in a state of identity diffusion are unlikely to have made a commitment towards anything and probably not explored much either. So they're kind of in a state of diffusion. Now, sometimes you'll find kids that are very likely to or inclined to commit to something, that this is who I am and this is what I'm going to be and stuff. And we call that a state of identity foreclosure. Where does that come from? Okay, so think about this. If somebody owns a family business, a family farm, or even in teaching, sometimes I'll hear students, they'll say, why do you want to be a teacher? And they'll say things like, well, my mom's a teacher, my dad's a teacher, my grandma was a teacher, I guess we're just all kind of teachers, so therefore I'm just going to be a teacher. I'm like, well, that's not the best answer for why you want to be, for your life, a teacher, right? What happens is they're committing to a profession without really doing any sort of exploration as to why they want to do that. Same is true for the person in the family business. Like parents tell them all life, one day you'll run this, one day you'll run this, one day you'll run this. What are you going to do when you grow up? I'm going to run the family business. Okay, why? Because I just been told that's what I'm going to do. Committed, no exploration. That's a state of identity foreclosure. Now, many of us in college, especially early college, are in a state of what we refer to as psychosocial moratorium. What does that mean? That means that a state of identity moratorium or psychosocial moratorium is that you have explored, or currently exploring, but you've not made a commitment yet. That means you go to college, you take lots of classes, educational classes, you go out and block, and you do things, and if you don't like it, you can still change your mind and go and do something else, right? That's a state where you are exploring, but you haven't yet made a commitment. Okay, so many young adults are in what we refer to as a state of moratorium, exploring without commitment. Now, some of us get a little luckier at an earlier age than others, and hopefully we get to a state of identity achievement where you have done lots of exploration, you've decided on this is what you like, this is what you want to do, this is what gives you satisfaction, and you commit to a profession. And once you commit to a profession and you like it and you feel satisfied, that is what they refer to as a state of identity achievement. Now, not all identity is exactly the same, okay? Sometimes we think of identity as strictly a sense of knowing who you are. Like, I know who I am, therefore I have a good sense of identity. Well, the truth is, a lot of kids grow up in households where they might not necessarily have two parents. They might not have any parents. They could be in a guardian situation. They could live with their grandparents, live with an older sibling. And they're trying to figure out who they are. And they don't have that. They have that absent aspect of it. Sometimes you could take a look at, even from an ethnic standpoint. Like, from an ethnic standpoint, what are we talking about? Well, identity is not an automatic part of of our overall identity. Okay, it's not automatic. You just don't know. I know who I am just because of my family or whatever else, right? There's some searching that's going on. When we take a look at ethnic identity, what we find is that, and as our classes become more and more diverse, it's important that teachers understand and help model or help to push kids in directions, to provide them models, to provide them explanations as to what it's like to be participate in or better understand ethnic differences. And you think about it, it's like, well, and sometimes it's much easier to develop a sense of identity when you're always around people like you. So you have adult role models that are like you, that you can fall right into that state of identity much easier. But not everybody has that. For instance, my children are half Mexican, quarter Irish, and a little bit of German, Norwegian, right? We live in a town that is not largely Hispanic. Okay, not a lot of Hispanic influences. Their mother is not in tune with her culture very much in that respect. Grew up in a household where the language Spanish was kind of cut off at a very young age, and so sometimes you just part of the culture is just shifted out before for any number of explanations. Okay. You live in a town, you don't live in a community that has a lot of Hispanic or role models. Okay, and I'm not Hispanic. I certainly encourage it. We can talk about that and all that stuff and do things in the household. But sometimes you're trying to figure out who you are. What does that mean? I got my Irish, German, Norwegian side, but I don't know my Hispanic side very well or my Mexican side very well. And my oldest daughter was kind of strange because she lived in here in Macomb, and then she moved from Macomb, and eventually she moved up towards Chicago, and she lived in not Villa Park, but Melrose Melrose, yeah. Anyway, larger Hispanic population. She met her husband there, Jaime there, and but she really changed when she left here, left Macomb, moved up there, had more interaction. There was like a real sense of herself kind of was turned on where she didn't have that experience here. And a lot of kids are going to be in classrooms, and that might be the same case for them. They don't have a lot of role models, don't have a lot of experiences, but they are African American or they're Hispanic or they're whatever, and they're just trying to figure that stuff out. Teachers can contribute to that. What we notice is that there's typically goes through a three-phase process as they develop that sense of ethnic identity. A lot of it stems from an extension of the parents' views. Like, what do the parents say? How do they see it? What do they talk about? Then there comes a time where the students have to explore. They have to have their own experiences, their own views. Those own experiences and those own views will then help them develop a greater sense of their ethnic identity. From that, once they start to have those experiences, start to develop those views, they can start to develop a distinct ethnic self-concept. And what's really important about that is the younger kids are, as they develop a greater sense of their ethnic identity, their ethnic self-concept, there's a strong relationship to self-esteem. Meaning, I'm good with who I am. I know who I am. I know what I believe. I know how I feel. They develop a greater sense of self-esteem. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do as teachers, is try to help the students better develop that sense of who they are and sense of identity. Now, one of the things also that we have in society today, in our culture today, is more discussions around gender identity. What we might not have had a number of years ago is certainly come to the forefront today. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about, now remember, is gender is not the same as sex. So we're not talking about the biological, physiological aspects of it, but what we're talking about from a gender identity is developing a conceptual framework of how someone sees themselves. Now, is it influenced by biology? Of course it's influenced by biology, right? You also develop a perceived sense of behavior, appropriate behavior, by perhaps seeing the way that your parents behave, or how your teachers, or watching even television or society at large. And you understand, you start to develop a framework for, I'm biologically a boy, I'm biologically a girl, and I see these behaviors, and as a result of these behaviors, I start to develop a sense of what gender is related to identity. But sometimes there's not a perfect match, okay? It is often greatly influenced by the same-sex role model growing up. And if they don't have that role model present sometimes, you may find that that if biology or their own conceptions of self or what they've seen hasn't taken hold as well, that there might be some conversation about exactly, again, like with identity, Who am I, right? Trying to figure that out. Sometimes things will direct itself, right, for the majority of the time. Well, what we see is that there's, again, with like anything else, like with ethnic concept or ethnic identity, that there's a strong relationship to self-esteem. And when children are younger and they go into middle school and the junior high and adolescence, what we find is when their behavior, when the way that they behave and the way that they see themselves matches the expectations, the gender expectations of society at large. Remember, I told you about how culture influences this. When they find that those things match, those kids tend to have a higher self-esteem. And when they don't match, those kids struggle. Well, why? Because they're not answering that question of who am I? I like this, I do this. Society at large sees that as appropriate. They reinforce me when I do that, and it's okay because I like doing it anyway. They reinforce me for that. I feel pretty good about myself. However, I like to do this. Society doesn't see it that way. I still engage in it, but they give me kind of a cold shoulder when I do. Therefore, how should I feel about myself? If you've ever seen the movie the Meet the Fockers with Robert De Niro and Ben Stiller and stuff like that, Greg is in the movie, and he is a nurse. He is a male nurse. Now, a lot of times when people think of nurse, the image that comes to mind oftentimes is that of a female. Okay, that's society, that's the culture. Not necessarily for everybody, but many people in our society, that will be the natural, because that's what's depicted in movies and shows and life experiences. Anyway, well, Robert De Niro is like, what, you couldn't be a doctor? You could study to be a doctor? Because why? Because he's a male? He has to be that? You see the gender influence there? And of course his fiance or his girlfriend says, like, oh no, he took the MCATs. He could have gone to be a doctor. He just didn't want to. He chose it because he likes it. Now, if it's received well by society, it's a match and gender identity is easier. When it's not, it's more difficult. And that's why sometimes you can see that males tend to have higher self-esteem than females. They're given more opportunities to try on different hats and be received positively by society. Whereas if you're a female and you try on different hats, and some of those hats are predominantly male, culturally male, perceived as male related behaviors, okay, then suddenly there's a mismatch, and then self-esteem is different, right? So it's interesting that as teachers, we have many opportunities to help build a student's sense of identity and sense of self and their peer interactions and develop good relations with one another, okay? Build a sense of industry, sense of initiative, a sense of identity. Teachers play a role in that because they have a lot of day-to-day contact. When you talk about gender theories, as I mentioned already, you could clearly see that biology can influence it, but we also have that of Bandura and social learning theory or social cognitive theory, what we learn through observation. And then even Piaget will talk about the idea of gender schemes, which is just schemes is another way of thinking, like a mental snapshot, visioning something. And when we go into society, we have a sense of what is an appropriate gender scheme for males or females. All of these things greatly influence the student's sense of gender identity. Now, one of the things that also can influence a student's sense of identity is what's taking place in adolescence, and that is their physical growth. And physical growth is going to vary depending upon gender and also within the gender itself. You'll find that many females, okay, as they go through these changes, physical changes, increased body fat through the through the hips, through the thighs. A lot of times we start to see those kind of changes occur, and sometimes they're not necessarily most well received by society. It might be perceived negatively by society because they're looking for stick thin or more athletic bodies, and we see these kind of bodies, and therefore they're looked down, and so suddenly you start to see young adolescent girls develop greater dissatisfaction with their body image, which can even lead to eating disorders, etc. What we find is that women, or I shouldn't say women, but young adolescents, female adolescents, are typically more dissatisfied by their weight than their height. Well, because you can be short by society standards, but being heavier is difficult. I have on the PowerPoint, the slides, I have an example of one thing that greatly influences both boys and girls, and that is their social media. Okay, is media in general, right? You think about they call it the Barbie doll effect, and you think about at a very young age, girls are playing with young Barbie dolls. You take a look at the distorted image that is on many of the dolls. Okay, and if you actually compare the messages that are sent from a Barbie to reality, you would see that they are very different. Proportionally speaking, the Barbie doll, if we were to look at them, they would be 7'2", with a waist of 22 inches and a chest of 40, and be like, okay, that's not what we look like. Same thing could be said for boys playing with action figures. They're playing with The Rock, or they're playing with other wrestling, Stone Cold. I mean, they have any number of action figures, even Iron Man or whatever else things they're playing with. Look at those images, the things that they see. Do they represent what young males, young females look like? No. So they get a distorted sense of self or their body based on that. When you take a look at the physical development that happens for young girls and young boys, okay, it occurs at different times with different changes, okay, and what we see is the adolescence, especially with the young boys, okay, that many of the physical changes that they go through are generally well received by society. Think about it. They get taller, they get more muscular, changes that are favorable by society. But not everybody goes through those same tracks, and as a result of that, even young adolescent males are going to experience some dissatisfaction, lower numbers, 25, maybe to 40% of dissatisfaction with body image, okay? They're more likely to be dissatisfied with height than they are with weight. What that means is that it's okay to be different weights, thicker, skinny, muscular, whatever else, but you kind of want to be taller, okay? Why? Well, again, society perceives height as something that is more either critical of appearance, better body image, more masculine, more leadership, whatever it might be. And I can tell you, I know this firsthand, having triplets, and my same age, so I got a little working experiment right here. And I've got one boy that is, they're 16, one boy that is, I'd say roughly 6 feet tall, 165 pounds, another boy that's like 5'10", 5'9", 5'10", he's 135 pounds, and then I have another boy that's like 5'6", 5'5", 5'6", and he's like 113 pounds. So it's like, boop, 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 right down. Now, what's interesting about it is you see that the youngest boy experiences things very differently than perhaps even, or I shouldn't say the youngest, the smallest boy of the triplets experiences things differently than the other two, just based on height and weight, okay? And so when we think about the effects that maturation plays on adolescence, we see that for young girls and young boys, it's very different. For young females, okay, early maturation has generally has a negative effect on their development, whereas late maturation, physical changes, late maturation kind of has a mixed bag. And what we see is that with the early maturing females, that means maturation starts in that 7, 8, 9 years old. What we see is it's often associated with, as they get older, with more of a negative body image. We also see that they struggle with more emotional difficulties and sometimes eating disorders. We also see that they start to engage in more risky or deviant behavior. That's not because it doesn't start at 7 or 9. It starts when they're a little bit older. But they tend to start running around with an older crowd because that makes them feel more comfortable in their group. They tend to be more popular, especially with males, which then can oftentimes help with developing better coping skills. But the overall effect is more negative with early maturation. With late maturation, they may be embarrassed by a lack of development. They're looking at their peers and they're saying, like, when is my turn? Like, when am I going to start to develop breasts? Or, why am I still this? And they feel a little bit more immature. But sometimes that relative thinness, that more athleticism, sometimes can lead them to be a little bit more social, can be a little bit more acceptable. And as a result, it's kind of a mixed bag for late maturation. Now with boys, it's just the opposite. Early maturation is generally received as more positive, whereas late maturation is perceived as more negative. Well, why is the early maturation perceived as more positive? Well, typically it's because they tend to have a more positive body image. They tend to be more confident because they're thrust into leadership roles. What does that mean? That means when you look at someone that is physically stronger, more athletic, suddenly they just tend to be pushed into being the leader. They tend to be popular as a result. They can engage in some behaviors that are a little bit more risky and considered more deviant because they're bigger and stronger and they start to run with an older crowd younger and they get into the same problems. However, late maturation tends to have a negative impact because the kids tend to have a negative body image because they just don't see themselves like their friends. And remember, what are they trying to do? Fit in, fit in, fit in. And if they don't fit in because they're shorter, skinnier, whatever else, negative body image. That negative body image also associated with them perceiving themselves as less capable, more childish or immature, which then leads to less popularity. They may develop better coping skills, just like the early mature, early adolescent female that's maturing early can develop coping skills because she's confronted with or dealing with these behaviors. All of this stuff, the friends, the status, the peer pressure, the physical changes, the emotional change, all of these things over time start to play a role in students developing their sense of self-esteem versus, say, self-concept. Two different ideas. Self-concept is the idea that is your perception of competence in various domains, whereas your self-esteem is your overall evaluation of yourself. Are you satisfied with yourself, or you're not satisfied with yourself? I am not good in math. Math is a domain. It's a category. I'm not good in it. That's a self-concept. I am interested in becoming a musician. I like music. I'm good at music. Music is a skill. That is a competency area. Versus I feel good about what I'm able to accomplish. I feel good when I accomplish something. Feeling good is a self-esteem issue. That's an emotional side. So when we take a look at the sense of self, and how it develops over time, what's really interesting is when they're really young, their self-concept is very concrete and their self-esteem is typically very high. That's because they don't have a lot of experiences with comparing themselves. When they're really young, they're like, I can do anything. And then they start comparing themselves and suddenly their self-esteem typically drops, right? So early on, self-concept tends to be more concrete. Their self-esteem is pretty high. As they get a little older, and they get 8 to 10 years old, their self-concept becomes a little less concrete, okay? Because they start comparing people and they don't know what they're good at, so that concept is different. Their self-esteem is often based on skill level, social interaction, very realistic. What that means is I'm looking around, I know where I compare to other people, so I'm getting a better sense of what I can do, and that means I can get a more better sense of self-esteem. As they get a little older and get into junior high, what we see is their self-concept, their identity, and perhaps becomes a little bit more abstract. They start to look at not just concrete, but what they can do or what they can be. Their self-esteem tends to drop though in junior high. Well, think about that. What's going on in junior high? You're asking yourself, who am I? What am I good at? Who are my friends? Where do I fit in? My body is changing. Very tumultuous. Okay? Where there's confusion. Like, what can I do? So with that confusion, you don't know what you're good at. How do you feel good about that? Your self-esteem tends to drop. The nice thing is that as you get older and later adolescence, your self-concept starts to become a little bit more multifaceted because you start to realize that you can do multiple things. You're not defined by any one thing. Okay? And as a result of that, your self-esteem starts to pick back up again. Now, this is no algorithm here, like this is how it works for everyone. It doesn't. Some kids have strong self-concept and self-esteem through much of their early and middle school and all that stuff. Some kids never really develop a strong sense of self-esteem because their self-concept isn't fully defined or they're valued. So if it's not valued, like what you're good at, what your skills are, then how do you feel good about yourself? So there's a lot of things that teachers we can do to build self-esteem. I'm about building kids up, finding what they're good at, pushing them to do things that they haven't done before, helping them understand what they can do, why they can't, what they do well, what they don't do well. Be a talent scout, right? The last thing that I want to share is this idea of, again, it ties into self-concept, is this idea of competency. Why is this important? Okay, it's important for one simple reason. Kids just want to be kids. Kids, adolescents, they just want to fit in. They want to develop relationships. They want to have friends. Do they want to learn stuff? Yeah, a lot of them do. They want to get good at certain things. They want to be a good baseball player. They want to be a good singer. They want to be a good biology student. They want to be, there's a lot of things that, from a competency standpoint. However, how we interact with them oftentimes influences that progression. Let me give you an example. The valuing of different domains impacts self-concept. What does that mean? Parents and teachers have very different values related to certain self-concepts. When you come home from school, what do parents usually ask? Do you have any schoolwork? They might ask how your day was, but then they say, do you have any schoolwork? Do you have any tests? Do you have to work? Do you have to do this? They value certain things. What do they value? They value that you get your schoolwork done and do well in your classes. When you go out and you do something as you get older, what do the parents tell you as you leave the house, as they drop you off? Behave yourself, be safe, watch your manners, please and thank yous. You're all very behavioral oriented, right? They're focusing on scholastics and behaviors. Are you a good student? Do you behave? Are you a good student? Do you get along with others? All right? You know who's important to us in that time period? Our friends. Do our friends care about that stuff? Not as much. What do they care about? They are peers, physical appearance. What are you wearing? What do you remember the first day of school? Wouldn't it be great if you could, or if you had a holiday and you got something for a birthday or for a holiday, or if you got something, a present from a parent or something for an occasion, or just for being you got something. What do you want to do? A lot of times we want to go to school, we want to wear that. We want to show our friends. We want to tell our friends because we want that sense of social acceptance, right? We want that friends to look at us and say, oh, you look great, or that's really cool, or I wish I had one of those. Makes us feel good, okay? And even, athletic competency, those athletic competency, doing something, a physical skill, doing it well, people look at you and say, wow, you're different. That's really cool. You're really talented. Our peers have a very different interest than what the adults or the teachers, our parents or teachers do. Who do we value oftentimes more in those formative years? Clearly our peers. So then what do we find ourselves doing? Doing the things to meet the peers' needs as opposed to that of the parents or the teachers. Now granted, it's not like a perfect 100% one way or the other. There's a lot of give and take there. But I wanted you to understand, as teachers, that we value this, but they might not value it the same way. So we have to be able to give and take and be flexible and go along with them and say, oh yeah, I can see how that's important. It's like, oh, did you get that? Where did you get that? Talk to them that way. That really is what a lot of young students are looking for from our teachers and from our parents and other adults too.